Hey, beauties and bees. Welcome back. I hope you're settled in somewhere comfortable because tonight's story is very, very intriguing. And it wasn't pulled from a book or a forum. It was actually told to me by a friend, and I'm still not entirely sure what to make of it. So, this happened a couple of hours outside Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, a decadent old landowner's mansion, tucked away in the forest. And it looked peaceful. But according to my friend, the longer they stayed there, the more they realized the peace wasn't peace at all. It was control. Let's get into the story. So this story starts with an invitation. This invitation came from Shahid, a friend from college, and his family owned an estate deep in the countryside. It was private, secluded, and removed from the noise of the city. So 4 of them went, Nabil and Akil, 2 brothers, and their friends Ari and Duv. And they thought it would be a quiet weekend escape. But they were wrong. After 3 hours on the road, their car rolled through the estate's massive iron gates. And the gates didn't swing open easily, they groaned. Beyond them stretched a long driveway lined with old trees. And at the end of it, the house, white, expansive, set back from everything else. And it sat alone in the center of the sprawling lawns that felt less decorative and more like a buffer between the mansion and the rest of the world. And behind the mansion stretched a vast lake, its surface unnervingly still. A narrow wooden bridge cut straight across it, connecting it to a mosque on the other side. And beyond the mosque was a village, small houses with tin roofs, narrow dirt paths, smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing in the dust. So at first glance, it looked like any other rural community. But the villagers moved carefully, like people who knew they were being watched. When Nabil met someone's gaze, they didn't smile, they immediately lowered their head. And it wasn't respect. It felt closer to caution. And that was so strange. They should have felt welcomed. They should have felt a sense of hospitality. But from the moment they stepped out of the car, something about the place felt off. Like the beauty of it was a shell, and beneath it, something else was festering. Shahed showed them to their rooms on the 2nd floor. Spacious, well-furnished windows offering a view of the lake. The beds were made with crisp, white sheets. Fresh flowers sat on the nightstands. Everything smelled faintly of jasmine and wood polish. Jahed's family was polite. His father, a man in his 60s with graying hair and sharp eyes, welcomed them warmly, asked about their studies, their families. His mother served them tea and sweets in the sitting room, speaking softly, smiling in a way that made you feel right at home. But that was until they learned the house rules. Shahed's father didn't announce them immediately. He waited until the plates were cleared. Then he folded his hands on the table. His smile faded. After dark, he said firmly, "You should remain inside." His eyes moved from one of them to the next, resting just a second too long on each face. "The grounds are large," he continued. "It's easy to get lost, and not everything out there belongs to you. If you visit the mosque," he said, "you will use the bridge. Do not walk along the edge of the lake, and do not swim." The room suddenly felt smaller after that. Jed's father leaned back in his chair, and then he smiled again as if nothing unusual had been said at all. And no one asked why. That evening they ate dinner on the veranda overlooking the water. The food was excellent. Biryani and fish so fresh that you'd think it had been caught from the lake just hours ago. The conversation was easy and pleasant, but as the sun set, something changed. The village, which had been full of sound all afternoon, children shouting, motorbikes puttering, the distant call of vendors, it went completely silent. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. Drew noticed at first. He paused mid-sentence, listening. "Is it always this quiet at night?" he asked. Nabil glanced toward the village. He saw a woman hurriedly pulled her children inside before snapping the door shut behind them. The lights went out immediately. Shahid's father looked toward the houses, then back at his plate. "People here sleep early," he said. "They lead simple lives." Well, it was a reasonable answer, but it didn't explain the severity of the silence. Because it wasn't just the absence of voices or engines, it was the absence of everything. No insects, no dogs barking, no wind rustling through the trees, just a hollow silence on a placid lake, deep and unnatural. Akwil had the strange thought that the village wasn't sleeping, it was hiding. They didn't sleep well that first night. Nabil lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence press against the windows. It felt so heavy. At some point, he heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow and careful, like they were trying not to wake anyone. They stopped right outside his door, and suddenly, the door handle moved. The metal clicked softly like someone was checking if it was locked. He held his breath. The handle stopped moving. Then he heard it. 3 slow knocks. Not loud, not rushed. Each one exactly the same duration apart. And then, silence. The hallway light had been left on. He could see the thin strip of light beneath his door. There was no shadow, no movement. And yet, something was there. Eventually, the footsteps moved on, but then he heard another sound. Whatever it was, tapping on the next door. Exactly 3 knocks, precise, repetitive, like whatever was knocking wasn't searching. It was just following a pattern. And when he mentioned this to Akwil the next day, his brother nodded. "Yeah, I heard it too," he said quietly. And they didn't bring it up with Shahid. The next morning arrived, cool and gray. Nabil and Akwil woke early, drawn by the sound of the call to prayer drifting across the water from the mosque. They decided to walk over, pray, and clear their heads. The house was still asleep, the hallways were empty, the only sound was their footsteps on the marble floors as they made their way down to the front entrance. Outside, the air was cool and damp. A thick, heavy fog was rolling over the grounds. If they hadn't known there was a lake there, they would have walked right into the water. They were lucky they didn't. The bridge stretched ahead of them, its narrow planks suspended over dark water. They crossed it together, their footsteps echoing softly. At the far end where the bridge met the land near the mosque, there was a gate, old wrought iron, rusty with age. Nabil reached for the latch. It didn't move. He tried again, pulling harder. It was locked. Akil peered through the bars. The mosque was right there, not 30 feet away. The cemetery behind it, pale stones rarely visible in the pre-dawn light. "I'll just go back." Akil said, "Find the guards and get the key." Nabil nodded. Akil turned and started back across the bridge, and within seconds, his figure had disappeared into the mist. The only sound left was the faint creak of the bridge settling behind him. Nabil, now alone, leaned against the gate, watching the sky lighten by degrees. The fog over the lake was heavier now, thick enough to swallow shapes whole. A few minutes passed. Then he saw movement on the other side of the gate. It looked like a person, tall, lean, dressed in white, smoking a cigarette. The amber glowed faintly in the dim light, but there was no smoke rising from it. It took Nabila a moment to recognize him. It was Akil. He was a little scared before, but now relief washed over him briefly. His brother must have found another way around. Maybe there was a second gate. Maybe the guards had let him through from the village side. "Akil," he called out, but there was no response. His brother didn't turn. He didn't blink. Didn't shift his weight. Just stood there, cigarette between his fingers, staring straight into the mist. "Akil," Nabil called out again, louder this time. But there was no response. The figure raised the cigarette to his lips. The movement was slow, delayed, like someone was merely imitating the act of smoking, but not quite getting it right. Nabil pressed his face closer to the gate, squinting through the bars. The fog thinned for just a moment, and the expression on the figure's face was completely blank, empty somehow, like there was no one inside. And then a hand landed on his shoulder. Nabil flinched, spinning around. Akil was standing right behind him, slightly out of breath. "The cards aren't there," he said. "I couldn't find anyone." For a second, Nabil just couldn't process what he was seeing. His mind refused to rearrange the pieces. He turned back toward the gate. The figure was gone. No footsteps, no splash, no retreating sheep in the mist. Just the cemetery and the fog. Nabil opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. His brother followed his gaze through the bars. "What?" Akil asked quietly. Nabil swallowed. You were standing right there, on the other side, smoking." Akil stared back at him, concerned. "Let's go inside," he said. Neither of them prayed that morning. They walked back across the bridge in silence, the mist curling around their feet, the lake beneath them black and perfectly still. By the time the sun was fully up, all four of them were sitting in Akil's room, speaking in low voices. Ari looked skeptical. "You sure you weren't just seeing things? It was dark, and you were tired." "I saw him," Abil said firmly. "He was standing right there. Same clothes, same height. It looked exactly like Akil. Except I was on the other side of the bridge," Akwil added quietly. Drew leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. "So what are you saying? That it's a ghost? A djinn?" No one answered, because saying it out loud made it sound ridiculous. A djinn in Islamic tradition isn't a ghost. It's something older, darker. A being created out of a smokeless fire. Not quite human, but capable of shape-shifting, of mimicking humans. Nabil couldn't shake the image. They decided to talk to Shahid. So they found him downstairs eating breakfast alone on the Ver. When they told him what had happened, his expression shifted just slightly, a flicker of something that might have been concern or recognition. He sat down his tea. "Wait here," he said. He returned with an older man, gray-haired, weathered skin, wearing simple clothes. It was Haroun, the estate's caretaker. He had worked for Shahid's family for over 30 years, and when they repeated the story, the locked gate, the figure smoking, the hand on Nabil's shoulder, Haroun listened without interrupting. Then he nodded slowly, like they had only confirmed something he already knew. "You saw a spirit," he said simply. "Or perhaps a djinn. It's not uncommon here." Those words hung in the air. Ari shifted uncomfortably. "Why here?" Haroun looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Shahid. Shahid's jaw tightened, but he nodded, granting permission. Haroun turned back to them. "This place," he said slowly, "has a history. Not all of it is spoken about, but it is known. The family has owned this land for many generations. They are powerful, respected. But power requires maintenance. People who threaten the family's control, they do not stay threats for long," he said. "What do you mean? What happens to them?" Akil asked, though part of him really didn't want to know the answer. "Come," Haroun said. "I will show you." So they followed him into the house, not toward the main rooms, but down a side hallway. They hadn't noticed before, narrower and older. The walls here were unpainted, just exposed stone and plaster. At the end of the hall was a door. Haroun produced a key from his pocket and unlocked it. The air that rushed out was cool, damp, and it smelled like old earth and stagnant water. Haroun flicked on a light, a single bare bulb that illuminated a narrow stone staircase descending into the basement. Shahid went first, then Haroun. Then, reluctantly, the others followed. The basement didn't match the feel of the house above it. It stretched farther than the mansion's walls should have allowed. The floor shifted underfoot, smooth concrete, giving way to packed soil. Doors lined the walls. Some were sealed with rusted hinges, and others reinforced with metal bars. No labels and no explanation. At the very back was another door. Haroun pushed it open without hesitation. Beyond it was a narrow passage sloping downward. The deeper they went, the colder it became, and then the passage opened up onto water. A wooden dock was built directly beneath the house itself. The planks had darkened with age. From the outside, no one would ever know the space existed. Haroun shone a light toward the water. Something was moving, thrashing just below the surface. A flash of silver, then another, a churning in the water that had nothing to do with the current. "This," Haroun said quietly, "is where they were brought." No one spoke. People who caused problems, who threatened the family's interests, business rivals, men who knew too much. Nabil looked down. The dock's edge was worn smooth. Grooves ran along the wood in parallel lines like something heavy had been dragged across the surface many times over many years. "The lake," Haroun said, "is full of piranhas. They were introduced many years ago by Shahid's great-grandfather as a solution. Bodies were brought here, thrown into the water. Within hours, there would be nothing left but bones." Drew turned away, hand over his mouth. "That's why we have the cemetery," Pun said. "The bones are dredged up and buried. The stones are left blank. No dates, no inscriptions, no acknowledgement. But from a distance, it looks like a proper burial ground." He looked at each of them in turn. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "There was one who didn't make it to the lake." They looked at him. "A man," Haroun said. "Years ago. He was kept down here." He gestured toward the tunnel. "He got loose, ran upstairs, tried to hide." He seemed reluctant now in a way he hadn't been about any of the rest. Like this was the one that sat with him. "What happened?" Drew asked. Haroun's eyes lifted toward the ceiling. "They found him in one of the guest rooms the next morning," Hadoun said inside a wardrobe. "The kind that locks from the outside." Nabil swallowed. "Locked?" Haroun didn't answer that. "He suffocated," he said simply. Then he looked back toward the tunnel. After that, the doors upstairs were reinforced. Sometimes, Howitt quietly, people say they still hear him. And they didn't stay in the basement long after that. Back upstairs in the daylight, the house looked the same as it had before. But now they couldn't unsee it. There was a significant darkness. Every hallway felt too long. Every closed door felt like it was hiding something. That evening, they stayed together in one room. No one wanted to be alone. As the sun set and the village fell silent, they began to hear things again. Except this time, every sound made sense. There was a gruesome story behind each one. The footsteps in the hallway, a door closing somewhere deep in the house, muffled screams. Then, from somewhere beneath them, they heard something heavy being dragged. It stopped, started again, stopped, and then the soft creak of the dock, and a splash that was just too heavy to be fish. No one moved. No one looked outside because the last thing you'd want in a place like this was to become a witness to an event. They immediately left the next morning. Shahid's family was polite. His father thanked them for visiting, said they were welcome any time. But there was something in his eyes, a quiet understanding, like he knew they would never come back. As they were loading the car, Nabil glanced at the lake one last time, the bridge, and on it, walking slowly toward the mansion, was a man he didn't recognize. Barefoot, hands at his side, moving like he'd been summoned. Nabil got in the car and didn't look back. The drive out felt far longer than the drive in. No one spoke much. It was only when they were back in Dhaka, surrounded by noise and traffic and the familiar chaos of urban life, that they started to breathe normally again. But the memory stayed. The lake, the dock, the basement, the figure smoking on the other side of locked gate, and the realization that some families don't just inherit wealth or land, they inherit secrets and methods of holding on to their power. And he said he still dreams about it sometimes. He would never forget that house, the bridge, the mist, the figure that looked exactly like his brother, but wasn't. And he said he looked into the family's history afterward, and there were rumors. He found rumors about people who had gone missing over the years, business rivals who had disappeared, activists who had been silenced, but nothing concrete, nothing provable, just patterns. He said the worst part wasn't what he saw that morning. It was realizing that the family still lived there, still entertained guests, still smiled, served tea, and pretended the basement didn't exist, still controlled the village, still owned the lake, and no one could do anything about it. So, if you ever find yourself invited to a beautiful estate, a place with high walls, carefully manicured gardens, and water that no one will swim in, if the people smile but don't quite meet your eyes, if there are rules that aren't explained, doors that stay locked, and stories that no one will finish, pay attention. Not to what you're being shown, but to what you're not being told. Because the most dangerous places aren't always the one that announce themselves. Sometimes they're the ones that look like paradise until you see what's underneath. And that is the end of tonight's story. Good night, beauties and bees, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye.